Okay, looking at Chapter 2, Romantic Composers and the Public. This is page 264 in your textbook. So we start off with Beethoven. We got to look at the context of Beethoven to get to where we are now. So a lot of people were, again, inspired by Beethoven, and composers wanted to emulate him in that they wanted to write music to fill an inner need rather than just work for a paycheck or commission. Because of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, aristocrats couldn't afford private composers anymore, so even if they wanted to work for a court, very likely they couldn't because most of them were gone at this point. Composers also, the composers who did work for the aristocrats, all of a sudden they were without a job. So that's another piece to the puzzle. Not only did people just practically could not work for a court or work for the aristocracy, they also could not, or decided they did not want to work for the aristocracy. They didn't want to work just because someone said, hey, you write some music. Overall, they wanted to become famous and judged favorably for posterity. They wanted to be like Beethoven. They wanted to be basically a famous musician. And so the composers have to start working for the middle class. This is mostly due to the Industrial Revolution. The middle class keeps getting bigger and bigger. Therefore, the market where the composers can basically sell their stuff to is actually going to get bigger. They have a wider variety of people. There's also a lot of urban expansion, which brings about new opportunities for musicians. So public concerts become a thing, and there are more orchestral and operatic groups formed because people wanted to hear all these compositions. And so this is the time period where the London Philharmonic Society and the New York Philharmonic are both established in the 1800s. There's a lot of virtuosity going around, or I guess being showcased would be a better way to say it. So in the 1830s, Franz Liszt, pictured here, and Niccolo Paganini, pictured here, were very well-known virtuosos, musical geniuses. That's what we mean by a virtuoso. And between the two of them, they developed what is called the solo recital, where it's an entire concert of just one person. Previously, that didn't really happen, so that was new. And they were basically your first rock stars. This is an actual quote by Paganini. He says, "I'm not handsome, but when women hear me play, they come crawling to my feet." Very egotistical of him, but it's not unrealistic. It actually happened. Moving on to the piano. So the piano was, again, the most popular instrument in the Romantic period. Part of that is because it's easily accessible for private music making. It's very appropriate and practical. The piano was a common fixture in the middle class home. As you can see, you can just lower this lid, and it basically looks like a table. It's basically furniture with a purpose. With that, there was a huge demand for solo piano pieces at this point. Orchestra and operatic works were a lot of the times transcribed to be played on the piano. So because this is a time before records, if you wanted to listen to your favorite music at home, you had to play your favorite music. So that's another reason the piano was so popular. Okay, so looking at how composers are targeting their audience, but also coming from their target audience. Again, the middle class is growing, and a lot of composers actually come from the middle class, so they know their audience well. Good examples would be Berlioz, Schumann, and Mendelssohn. Some composers faced family opposition. Just like today, a lot of people don't associate a wealthy living with being a musician or a composer. However, some people were like, nope, don't care, still being a musician/composer, and that still happens today. There's a change in the mindset, so the family trade mindset starts to disappear or dissipate a little bit at this point. So passing down the family trade from father to son, like you have with Bach and Mozart and even Beethoven, it still happens, but again, it's not as common. It's just as common to see people come from the middle class and start to write music. Challenges for composers. A lot of them did not become successful enough just as a composer to support themselves by writing music alone. A lot of the times a composer had to work in several areas at once to make up a living income. So they would be touring musicians, giving piano lessons, writing music criticism, and even conducting. That's actually really similar to what happens today. Just because you're a musician does not mean that one source of income is enough for you. You probably will have to piece it together from different avenues. Okay, Chapter 3, page 267, Art Song. So art song is a distinctive form in Romantic music. It existed a little bit beforehand, but this is when it starts to really become an elevated form. The art song is a composition for solo voice and piano. As you see here, someone singing and someone playing. Hold up, let me move my face again. Okay, so the accompaniment line, the piano line, is going to be an important part of the work. The piano is going to be equally as important as the voice. With just two individuals, it makes sense. They share the load. Originally, these art songs were supposed to be sung in a home, but now it's sung in recital halls. We don't usually gather around the piano and sing art songs anymore. Usually we are gathered around the TV. So, moving my face yet again, the art song connection to poetry. So poetry and music are very much fused in this form, and a lot of composers wanted to use poetry from the famous poets of the day. Some song composers during the Romantic period, some of the best known would be Schubert, Schumann, and Brahms. And by Schumann, I mean Mr. Schumann. These three gentlemen used their native German language. A lot of art song is in German, but it's in other languages too. Poets that would have been very popular would have been Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. We talked about him and his impression of Beethoven. And then there's also Heinrich Heine. Both of these are German poets and writers. The German art song is actually called a specific word. It's called a Lied, or if it's plural, it's Lieder. Now, the inspiration for art song. So a lot of art song composers were inspired by this concept of yearning. Okay, so it's very dramatic. There's anything about like lost love, nature, the imagination. And art songs are frequently focused around despair and unrequited love. Okay, so it's not a happy love song. It's usually a sad love song. But you'll usually find elements of nature, supernatural events, even inspiration from folk tales. And it's as if you were reaching out from the soul and you're exposing your deepest emotions and desires. And it's all over the place dramatic. But it's fun. The piano in art song. So again, voice and piano will share the task of interpreting this poem. And the emotions that you're trying to draw out, maybe an image or so, will be focused on in the piano line oftentimes. There's a lot of word painting in art song, so don't forget word painting. We learned it a long time ago, even as far back as Unit 1. Go ahead and review that term. And the mood of the art song will be confirmed and even sometimes summarized at the very end in a postlude, which is a section after the voice finishes singing, after the singer is done, the piano keeps playing, and that's called a postlude. Now, forms in this genre. There are two basic forms of art song. First is strophic form. It's easy to remember, and it's commonly found in folk songs. So that's kind of how it was used and developed for the art song. It was familiar to a lot of people. What is strophic form? Each verse will use the same melodic structure. Hymns will follow a strophic form more or less. Now, in opposition to that, you have through composed. This is when you have new music for each stanza or verse. A good way to remember this. Again, hymns will follow a strophic form, and through composed, you have different music for each verse, and Bohemian Rhapsody is a great example of through composed. And I'll have both of these linked in your playlist so you can listen to those. And you can, as you're listening to them, think of them with a critical lens, if you will. Okay, next is song cycle. This is when art songs are grouped together as a set. So they may be connected. They're usually connected by something, whether it be a storyline, music ideas, or they're from the same collection of poetry. Good examples of song cycles would be Schubert's Winterreise, or The Winter's Journey, and Schumann's Dichterliebe, or Poet's Love. So this is an example. This is from the Dichterliebe, the Schumann. These are all the songs that are in the song cycle, and they all follow the same concept. Okay, going on to page 268, looking at Franz Schubert. This is chapter 4. So Schubert lived from 1797, died in 1828, and he is who we would consider to be the earliest master of art song. So, yeah, he was the first one to really take this form and elevate it to the point of, I guess, mastery. He never had an official position. He did not have a position at court, and he was not a conductor, nor was he a virtuoso. He didn't go around playing for different people and playing concerts. His income came from composition alone, which was why he was dirt poor, okay? No way to go dance around that. He was broke. And he actually died quite young. He was just in his 30s. So the life of Schubert. Even though he died young, he had a very full life. He was born in Vienna, so again, a very prominent city. He was the son of a schoolmaster, and at age 11, he became a choir boy, and he won a scholarship to the Imperial Seminary. He had a strong love of poetry, which is probably why he started to grasp onto this idea of art song. His first masterpiece, Gretchen am Spinnrade, which is Gretchen at the spinning wheel, he wrote when he was 17 years old, and it's still performed a lot today. At age 18, he wrote 143 different art songs, including the one that we will look at in just a second, Erlkönig, or the Earl King. At age 19, this was the height of his career, he wrote 179 works. Not all of them were art songs, but some. He included in this would be 2 symphonies, an opera, and a mass. So he wrote lots of things, but a lot of people do associate him with the art song. So looking at some other things here. At age 21, he started to give up teaching. He was not going to make his career by teaching, and he devoted himself completely to writing music. We can consider him a bohemian person. He wanted to associate himself with other artistic people like poets and artists in Vienna. And he often lived with friends because he couldn't afford rent. So he would mooch off of his friends and basically sleep on the couch or in the spare room. Now note some of this is italicized, so you should probably write it down. A lot of the times, he would perform at Schubertiades, which are parties where only his music was played. A lot of the times it was him playing this music. His music is kind of geared towards private home performances, particularly the art songs, but other music of his as well. Not everything, but most of it. He did not mingle with the aristocracy, and he died at the age of 31. So this is the Schubertiade. Here's Schubert at the piano, and it's a wealthy friend. All of his friends are gathered together, making music, enjoying the evening. So looking at his music here, he wrote over 600 art songs in his short life. He also wrote symphonies, string quartets, chamber music, masses, opera, etc., etc. His melodies will range from a simple folk quality to very complex material, so he runs the gamut. And his piano accompaniment lines are equally as evocative as the voice. A lot of the times they are just as interesting, if not more so, than the voice line. He has an unfinished symphony written in 1822 and a great C major symphony written between 25 and 26. Both of those are considered to be on par with Beethoven's drama and power. So Schubert, he actually lived at the same time as Beethoven. He drew a lot of inspiration from Beethoven. He's not the first, nor will he be the last. But it's good to, Beethoven is kind of used as the measuring stick against which all the other composers will measure themselves. Anyway, looking on page 269 and going on to 270 is Erlkönig, or written in 1815. And it's a great example of Romanticism. It has supernatural elements, and it's a setting of a Goethe poem or a Goethe writing, and it's through composed. So again, each verse is going to be written to different music. You're going to hear the same themes throughout, but the melodic lines for each verse are not always the same. Okay, so backtracking here. Alright, so the story of Erlkönig, it's actually a folk tale from the Germanic region. The Earl King is basically this boogeyman, more or less, that lives in the forest, and he tries to eat young children. So that's the backstory here. The rest of it you can follow along in this art song. I have this video linked in the playlist, and if you click for subtitles, they'll show up in English. You also have a listening guide with the English translation on page 270 in your textbook. All right, next Schubert composition is Die Forelle. This is basically the trout, written in 1817. It also represents a lot of romantic ideals in that it is folk-like, it's simple, and it deals with nature. Or I shouldn't say simple. It sounds simplistic, even though it's well-crafted. The text is by a guy named Schubert, and the trout, it's focusing on a trout, a fish. It's swimming around in a brook, and it's all happy until it's caught by a fisherman, which is really sad. But it's a modified strophic form, so it's kind of a combination of those two different forms. In modified strophic, you have two or more stanzas that are set to the same music, while the other stanzas have new music. And you'll be able to hear where that new music comes in. Okay, you have an English translation in your book on page 273. You also have the translation here in the video. The video is again included in your playlist, and you have a listening guide in your book. So, on to the last Schubert piece that we will look at. This is a piano quintet, in A major. It's called the Trout Quintet, written in 1819. We're looking at the fourth movement here. This is considered chamber music. It's only meant for 5 people. It's meant for a small ensemble. It was commissioned by an amateur cellist, so someone who just loves to play cello, and this guy really enjoyed Die Forelle, the art song. So this movement, movement 4, is basically theme and variations on that song. So the music, the theme is going to sound familiar. It is scored, so it is written for piano, violin, viola, cello, and double bass, which is kind of an odd combo, but it works. You have a listening guide on page 274, and this video is linked in the playlist.